Hello, everyone. Today, I wanted to talk about the top 26 starting goalies in the NHL. Now, I know 26 is a very weird number to pick, but it's because there's 5 teams that their goalies are going into their first season as true starters. Um, and I think that it's too early to place them anywhere. Um, I do have them here where I would have them ranked. I'm not going to explain myself on them now. I'd have Shesterkin at number 10, Demko at 16, Samsonov at 16, but behind Demko, Subban at 25, and for Petersen on the LA Kings, it's too early to say. He's played 8 NHL games, which, even compared to Shesterkin, that's really not many. And for I said Demko and Petersen, which means that I do consider Holtby and Quick backup goalies, which are controversial. If I were to have Holtby on the list, I would have him at 23rd. And if I were to have Jonathan Quick on the list, I would have him at 21. So with that being said, let's get into the list. So at number 26, we have a goalie on a phenomenal team, Peter Mrazek. So the Carolina Hurricanes, ignoring goaltending, going strictly on offense and defense, are a top 3 team in the NHL, I would say. But because of that goaltending, that tandem of Mrazek and Reimer, both of them would be phenomenal backup goalies. Neither one of them is a good starter at all. And either one of them, even if you put Reimer as the starter, I would probably still have him as the last place goalie in the NHL. And he hasn't really shown any. Even 2 seasons ago, where they won that run to the conference finals, it was debatable whether it should have been him or Curtis McElhinney as the starter. I personally thought that should have been McElhinney. I'll admit I was probably wrong on that. But even still, his stats have been middling with a team with, I'm willing to say, the best defense in the NHL. With players like Slavin, Hamilton, Pesce, picking up Brady Shea, Sami Vatanen, even though he's gone now. His stats, if he was an average goalie, should be phenomenal stats, like around a 920 with a defense like that. But it doesn't work out that way for him. His stats are still around like 904, which is bad stats. But with the defense he has, they're terrible. Moving on, at number 25, I have technically 2 goalies, either Martin Jones or Devin Dubnyk. Pick whichever one you want as your starter. I probably think that'll be Dubnyk, but whichever one is their starter, it's not good. And it's a terrible tandem. The only reason why I'm giving either of them slack, like to put them ahead of Mrazek, is because their defenses weren't as good. Granted, I will say that I do think Minnesota's defense is underrated, but it's still nowhere near Carolina's defense. And the Sharks' defense was terrible last year. Erik Karlsson and Brent Burns are your 2 best defensemen by a mile, and neither of them know how to play defense some nights, it seems. So that's why they get that little bit of slack to put them ahead of Mrazek. I really debated on putting them in last. But overall, their stats are terrible, and they're aging, and I have no idea why the Sharks thought that it was a good idea to pick up Dubnyk. Put Aaron Dell as your starter, re-sign him, and that will be better. Pick up Jimmy Howard, who just retired, not retired, but who just left Detroit and is still a free agent, and that's a better option as starter than either one of them. I just don't understand what the idea is in management there. All they're doing is eating up more and more cap space, refusing to rebuild, when they're obviously a terrible team now. I digress, though, and continue on to a goalie that could either prove me really wrong or really right next season. Sergei Bobrovsky of the Florida Panthers. I would have had him higher before the playoffs started. Playoffs started, I had Florida pegged to beat the Islanders, and my reasoning was Bobrovsky. I thought everyone can agree Bobrovsky had a terrible season in Florida this year. And whether you think it was a one-off or you think that this is the real him is debatable. I thought that it was a one-off season, and I was like, okay, in the play-ins he should be much better. He's had this big rest, and it'll be like a new season now. And I personally think if they have a good goalie in that series that's not Bobrovsky, they beat the Islanders still, I think. And maybe if they start Dredger, then they win that series. But Bobrovsky was just awful all season. And I would still say he's better than Mrazek, Jones, or Dubnyk, obviously. But, and I know I can't discredit what he did in Columbus, but you watch and now Korpisalo and Merzlikins are both doing almost as good as he did in Columbus. And it's the defense there. Like, their defense, like I said in the defenseman video, doesn't get enough credit. With Werenski and Jones as your top two there, I think that they'd make any goalie look good. Like, even put like I said, put Jimmy Howard in there, and he might look like a top-end starting goalie again. Okay, and then moving on to number 23. He was traded from the Pittsburgh Penguins to the Ottawa Senators this offseason. Matt Murray. I've been saying for years that Murray was overrated. I would have never had him this low any other year, though. So, Murray, Cinderella run, his first season, wins the Stanley Cup. Second season, but that's not even his first season yet. He gets called up because Fleury gets hurt. Second season, he's the starter now, but he pretty much split starts with Fleury, and people were claiming that he was still an elite goalie. I kept saying, no, that's not a true first season for him. And then in season 3, he finally gets his first true season, and he doesn't look good. And then this next season, that just pass happens, and he loses the starting job to Tristan Jarry. And Tristan Jarry was by far the better goalie. And even looking at their stats, you would think if he's a good goalie, he should have at least similar stats to Tristan Jarry. Tristan Jarry's stats were phenomenal, and Matt Murray's were terrible. Like, I think that he had below a 900 save percentage, and I've talked before about how I don't think Pittsburgh's defense is that good, but it's not terrible, and it definitely doesn't justify save percentage below 900. And in Ottawa, they think that he'll be the fix for them, and he might be better than Craig Anderson, but I could very well see Nelson stealing the job again, like he did with Craig Anderson last year. It's just, I don't think that he's a good goalie. He could be a good backup. I could see him being very well like a Jake Allen type, where you put him in a starting role and he'll crack under pressure, but as a backup, he might be a phenomenal option. But we'll have to see what happens from here on with him. Moving on, though, at number 22, another goalie in a new place, Thomas Greiss. So, he's a free agent, he leaves, and he goes to Detroit. This will be a real test for him. His stats were very good with the Islanders, but it seems like any goalie that comes in there has good stats. And it doesn't matter how good they were before they came in. They just put up great stats with the Islanders. The Islanders have a very strong defensive structure with their team, and it makes every goalie that comes in look better. He had a good save percentage. It wasn't anything like, oh my god, but it was definitely very good. But why have him so low on the list? He's never shown this in his career until Barry Trotz came, and until the team actually started looking good. And he's been Semyon Varlamov's backup, and he's been Robin Lehner's backup. And it shows something where he puts up really good stats 2 years in a row. And the first year, they go to Varlamov to be their starter, even though people were saying that Greiss could take the reins. And then Varlamov comes in, and they decide to move Greiss to fit Sorokin in the lineup instead of moving Varlamov, which I personally agree with that option, with that decision. And we'll have to see how he does in Detroit. It's a very porous defense in Detroit. So it'll be a real test for him, and we'll be able to see, is he a great goalie? I'm a huge fan of Jonathan Bernier, and I really think that he will end up taking the starting job back, like I was saying with Nilsson with Murray. And I just don't see it working out with Greiss, especially at such an old age. He's, I think, 34, and him finally getting a shot as a starter now, it just seems really weird, and I don't think it'll be a good fit. Moving on from there, though, at 21st, talking about Grace's old team, Semyon Varlamov. Varlamov had his struggles in Colorado, but he wasn't a terrible goalie. And we're not in terrible goalie territory anymore. Like, every goalie from here on is actually pretty good, I would say. At least the starter. And do I think that he'll be a starter by the end of next season? No. I think that it's Ilya Sorokin's turn. But I very well see, for at least the first half of the season, it's Varlamov's net, kind of what they did with Holtby and Samsonov. And then next year they'll try to move Varlamov out. Varlamov, yet again, with the same thing as Greiss. Stats were really good, but it's Islanders. Is it the Islanders system, or is it the goaltending? The goaltending was terrible on the Islanders, even Thomas Greiss, before Barry Trotz. And can we really trust that this is sustainable? I'm not sure. We'll really have to wait and see. Islanders are stuck in a very tough division this year, playing each team in that division 8 times. And their defensive system could be exposed with teams playing them 8 times and realizing what works against them. And if this same system doesn't work, they could be in trouble. Moving on, though. This team had a very good season after years of failure, other than 1 year of success in the Oilers. Mikko Koskinen. So, last season Koskinen had a very good year, I would say. Around a .915 save percentage, and the defense isn't fantastic there, but it's not terrible either. They have a lot of top 4 defensemen, but I don't think that they have any true top 2 defensemen on that team. You can argue Clefbaum, you can argue Nurse, but overall, I don't think so. It's a very average defense, I would say. And Koskinen put up very, very good numbers at I believe it was around .915. But I can't judge it on this season alone. If I judged it on this season alone, I would definitely have him higher. Year before, though, I was not impressed by him. His stats were terrible, and it was basically the same defense. I do think Koskinen got better, and I could see him rising in the ranks next year if the Oilers continue their success, especially in a Canadian division where probably every team except the Senators are in the running for a playoff spot. This will be a big test for Koskinen, and they kind of split him with Mike Smith last year, which I didn't understand. But while they do still have Mike Smith, it's Koskinen's net. No, unless if Smith drinks from the fountain of youth this year, it's Koskinen's net. And we'll really be able to see, was last year a fluke? Or was the year before a fluke? Because that question seems to be asked every year with the Oilers. Well, are they a playoff team? Or are they not? Do they need an Art Ross season out of one of their players to be a playoff team? As I believe the only 2 seasons that they made the playoffs, McDavid won the Art Ross, and now Draisaitl 1 year at Ross. And do they need that every year to actually make the playoffs? I think that they've been getting a lot better, and we'll see what happens. Moving on to number 19, though. It's team. Very good defense also. UC Soros. So in Nashville, they have a phenomenal defense in their top end, though. Yossi, Ellis, and Ekholm, I would argue, is the best top 3 defense in the NHL. Maybe you can argue Tampa or Carolina, but it's absolutely top 3. But then after that, probably Dante Fabro, I would say, is their 4th best defenseman. And that's a little shaky having him at number 4. And then 5 and 6 is terrible. That their depth on the blue line is awful. And he was able to put up decent stats very similar to Koskinen's. And he's a younger goalie, which gives him a tiny bit of an edge over Koskinen. It was basically a tie with them, though. But I really like Saros' game. He's finally taking the reins from Pekka Rinne. And until Askarov is ready, he will be their starter. And he'll probably end up being moved after Askarov comes into the NHL. But I see good things from UC Soros. And honestly, there's not much else to say about him. He's been a good goalie. At number 18 now, onto the second line. The team here is phenomenal. Philip Grubauer. I go back and forth on Grubauer. I really liked him in Washington. And I really liked the pickup to Colorado. And I believe that was his second season in Colorado that he just played. And he didn't look that good in his first season. But this season was different. But you can argue that they had a phenomenal team. Offense, defense, everything was phenomenal for them. And I know that I mentioned in the defenseman video that their defense wasn't amazing. But they do have Ryan Graves. Like I said, one of the best defensive defensemen in the NHL, in my opinion. And they do have Kel McCarr, who is still a very good defenseman. And when you have players like Landeskog, Rantanen, and McKinnon, the puck's going to be in the other team's offensive zone most of the time every night. So you don't really need to worry about the defensive aspect when the puck's not in your own defensive end. But he's stood strong when he does get challenged, and overall he's just he's a good goalie. And obviously, I think he's the 18th best in the NHL. So I'd say he's around an average goaltender. At number 17, most of the time I see this guy lower on people's lists. I have Linus Ullmark. So Ullmark is a very tough goalie to judge. 2 seasons ago, his stats were bad. Last season, his stats were good. He's still a young goalie, though. And I see him getting progressively better. And when I watch him, he looks like he's getting better. He doesn't look like, well, he got lucky, or, well, it's the defense. It's not the defense, I can tell you that. Unless if Rasmus Dahlin could play 60 minutes a night, it's not the defense. And the team isn't that great. Yet his stats are good. And I'd say he's a very good goalie and absolutely a good starter in the NHL. And when Pekka Luukkonen can come into the NHL, that'll be a really strong 1-2 punch in net with Luukkonen and Ullmark. And I just see some really good things from this kid, and I could see when they finally build a team around Eichel and Dahlin, he could be that goalie that helps them make a run to the cup. He's not a Vezina caliber goalie, and he's not a Conn Smythe caliber goalie, but he's a very good, solid goalie. Moving on, though, at number 16, new team again, Cam Talbot. So he will be in Minnesota this season, which will be very interesting to see how he does. On Calgary last year, he took the net from Riddick, and I was all for it. I was saying that from the start of last season. I was saying that he was going to take the net from Riddick at some point. And he finally did by the play-ins, and he played like every game in the play-in. And he looked really good. And he was a big reason. And in the regular season, he was a big reason that the team stayed relevant, even though they had a lot of lacking performances on the team. And I think he had a .919 save percentage last year for, yet again, a struggling team. Granted, they do have a phenomenal defense there, with Noah Hannafin and Mark Giordano and a bunch of other really good talent. And they're a good team overall. But if you look throughout Talbot's career, other than the 1 or 2 seasons in Edmonton after their one playoff appearance, he's been phenomenal. And in that one playoff appearance that he had with Edmonton, he was looking like that he could possibly win a Vezina in his career, or at least that he was the goalie that could carry Edmonton to the cup. Didn't end up working out that way. I think they'll work out a lot better in Minnesota. They have a better defense, in my opinion. I'm a huge fan of Dumba Spurgeon. And Suter's a little past his prime, but he's still good. And I think that he'll end up doing really well with them. All right, anyway, moving on to number 15. This goalie, it was his first season as a starting goalie last year, and I think he excelled at it. And I probably would have had him lower on the list until the play-in round. Until the playoffs. But Jonas Korpisalo really proved that he is a good goalie. And I know that I made the argument with Bobrovsky about the defense in Columbus, but I don't think that's 100% the case with him. He looks phenomenal. And the defense, and at least in that one game where he played 8 periods of straight hockey without letting up a goal for most of the game, he was phenomenal. And his team was getting torched out there. They were playing terrible. And it wasn't the defense there that kept them in the game. It was Korpisalo. And I know that they eventually lost that game, but I'm pretty sure he came pretty close, or might have even broken the record for most saves in a single game. And I know that's one game, but throughout that whole series, he helped Columbus stay relevant against a red-hot Tampa that was bound to win the Stanley Cup that season. And with everyone expecting them to miss the playoffs this past season, he was a big staple as to why they didn't get worse and why they were able to stay a really good team. I don't think that they would have made the playoffs this upcoming season in the regular divisions, but in their current division, if Korpisalo and Merzlikins can keep up the goaltending they've been giving, I don't see why they can't be a number 3 or 4 in that division. And it will be on the backs of the goaltending and the defense. And if Korpisalo showed anything last year, he can handle it. And he can handle that workload that he might end up getting next year. And I think that Columbus will be all right. Moving on to number 14. A lot of people aren't going to like me for having this guy low. Carter Hart. Don't get me wrong. Everyone that's going to attack me saying Hart's the best goalie in the NHL. Give him time. Give him more than one season until you're willing to put this pressure on that kid. Carter Hart, don't attack me about this, but he didn't have a great playoffs. I'm going to go right out and say it. His playoffs were okay. Against the Islanders, he did not do that well. I know he had 2 shutouts against Montreal, but he didn't really face that many shots. And it was Montreal who shouldn't have even been in the play-ins. Granted, they're shutouts still. But it's 2 games with not many shots. any goalie can go on a hot streak and get back-to-back shutouts. And there's a recent obsession with him being a top-end, like top 5 goalie in the NHL right now. I saw a post even today on Instagram asking who was the best goalie in the new Eastern Division. And the comments were overwhelmingly Carter Hart, even though I think Tuukka Rask is clearly the number one choice there. And will Carter Hart be the best goalie in the NHL? I don't know. But he will be up there. Him, Shesterkin, Samsonov, Sorokin, Askarov, Knight. Those are all probably your top and Demko. Those are probably your top 7 goalies for the next 10 to 15 years. Once they all fully develop. And I could see any of the 7 going in any order. As a Ranger fan, I hope that Shesterkin is number 1, but as of right now, though, give Carter Hart time. He's not the best goalie yet, but he can get there. Moving on, though, at number 13, a goalie that had another goalie that it was their first season as a true starter. This one wasn't even in the NHL at all last year. Tristan Jarry. It kept seeming like they were playing games with Jarry and DeSmith about who was going to be in the NHL and who wasn't. And Jarry took it this year, and he ran with it. And he took that starting job from Matt Murray. And like I was saying about Matt Murray, their stats weren't even close. Tristan Jarry had a phenomenal season, and Matt Murray didn't. And when it's 2 goalies on the same season, having completely different... 2 goalies on the same team, having completely different stories about their season, it clearly shows that either one goalie's terrible or one goalie's great. And I don't think Matt Murray is a terrible goalie. I think Tristan Jarry is a great goalie. And he had somewhere on 920s or 930s in his save percentage. And that was an unbelievable season for him. Granted, though, I know that I say that Pittsburgh's defense isn't that great, but it is a very good defense. Marino had a good season. Letang had a good season, even though he was injured a bit. And Dumoulin had an okay season. And overall, it's a very good team. You have Crosby and Malkin who chip in defensively too. But Tristan Jarry, his stats are unbelievable. And if he repeats the same type of season next year, if he is the true starter, like when he is the true starter, like I said about Matt Murray, his first season as starter, he was basically splitting time with Fleury. So it's too soon to judge with him. It might be a little bit too soon to judge with Jarry to have him any higher than 13. But I could absolutely see if he has a season anywhere near what he had this year, next year, he's probably a top 10 goalie in the NHL on my list next year. Moving on to number 12. Finally, a goalie that it wasn't their first season as a starter, or a goalie that's not on the move. Freddie Andersen, Toronto. He takes a lot of slack from Toronto fans. A lot of slack from Toronto fans that he doesn't deserve. He's a really good goalie. Would I put him in elite category? It depends on the night. He has Morgan Rielly, who's a phenomenal defenseman in front of him. I really like Jake Muzzin. And then other than that, his defense isn't that good. And his stats are good, not amazing. And like I said on the defense list, Toronto is known for having a terrible defense. And he's able to hold down the fort and still have really good save percentages. And this season, he had a bit of a down year. And I think that he will improve next year. And we'll have to see what happens. But overall, though, he's just a very good goalie. I don't think he's elite. But I don't think that he's bad either. And a lot of Toronto fans attack him. And it's just... He doesn't deserve it because he is a lot better than most of that defense. And he's one of their better players. And I know that there have been rumors about trading him. But if they trade him and they want to rely on Kemple and Dell as their tandem, they're not even touching the playoffs next year. And we'll have to see what happens, but I think that he is a very good goalie. And if Toronto can figure out what's been going on, why they can't get past the first round of the playoffs, and maybe they can go on a run to the cup, he will be that goalie that brings them to the cup. Moving on to number 11. This pick is a bit controversial. It is another goalie that it was their first true season as a starter. The season before, he kind of took the reins by the end of the year, though. Mackenzie Blackwood. So Blackwood played for the Devils, obviously, last season, and he was amazing. First part of the season, the team wasn't good. And the stats were terrible. His stats were still good, though. But then in the second half of the season, after the trade deadline, and their team probably got worse, well, it should have gotten worse with trading players like Taylor Hall, the team started to excel. I don't think that the team overall looked better, though. When I was watching them, it was Blackwood standing on his head every single night. And he just did everything that he could for that team. And the team was ending the season actually doing pretty well before the play-in started. Probably put another few weeks on the season before you end it, and I would think that the Devils are the team that gets that spot instead of Montreal in the playoffs. And who knows, maybe the Devils would take out Pittsburgh. And now we're talking about the Devils being a possible playoff team for this upcoming season. But it was really on the on the back of Blackwood. And I think that he's a phenomenal goalie, and as the years go on, he'll just keep moving up this list. And I could realistically see him being in those top 7, which would make it top 8 goalies that I mentioned earlier when I said about Carter Hart. He's just that good, and I could see him, and the sky's the limit for this kid. Moving on, though, and starting our top 10 goalies is a goalie that is probably a folk hero for St. Louis, Jordan Binnington. Obviously, they want Binnington to do well, but all St. Louis really cares about is that Binnington got them that first Stanley Cup. And there was a lot of debate going into the next season of, is Binnington really good? Or was it a hot rookie goalie that will end up fizzling out? And unlike Matt Murray, I really liked what I saw in Binnington. And I really thought that he would have a better season than he had this past season, but he still had a very good season. I think last year I had him around number 5 on my list, but number 10 is still nothing to laugh at. He's a phenomenal goalie, and there were some nights that Jake Allen looked like he was the better goalie on that team, so it's really good for Montreal to pick up Jake Allen. But he was still a really good starter. And I do think that they have a phenomenal defense, which is why he doesn't move up any higher than 10, because his stats do justify a little bit higher if his defense was worse. The test is now, can he keep up these stats, and can he keep St. Louis relevant without Alex Pietrangelo? Ryan O'Reilly will probably be named captain, and from there, it's time to see what Binnington can do without a star defenseman. And this is his real first full season with a big test like that. And I expect him to excel at it. And I don't see him moving much from number 10 in future seasons. He doesn't really have much room to grow, but I don't see him falling off either. But we'll see. And now moving on to number 9. Depending on who you are, you'll say I have him too high, or I say I'm ridiculous for not having him at number 1. Carey Price. Yeah, 2015 Carey Price, 100%. I'd have him at number 1. And Seen a lot of debate about him. Hey, maybe Kreider doesn't injure him, they win the cup. I could see it. I don't think so. I think it would still be LA's cup. But who knows? But since then, he hasn't been the same Carey Price since 2015. And anyone who I think is saying that he's the number one goalie in the NHL, their mind is still in 2015. He's still a phenomenal goalie. And he was a huge reason for them knocking out Pittsburgh in that first round of the play-in. And I truly believe that Carey Price is a elite goalie in the NHL. But the way he's been playing these past few seasons, it's getting more and more questionable. He had a phenomenal play-in, and hopefully this long break really helps him. I think that he's been dealing with some injuries. And I think Montreal has a very underrated blue line. It always gets crap for not being good. They have Shea Weber and Jeff Petrie as their top two defensemen, who I think that they're both high-end defensemen. And I'm a huge fan of Victor Mete, who was, I think, he was on the bottom pair, but I really think that he's a top four defenseman. And they have the rookie coming up that I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he should really help too. And with the young kids coming up, this is the season for Carey Price to show I'm still an elite goalie. I'm still one of the best goalies in the NHL. I don't see him doing it. I think his numbers will stay around average, and he'll stay around number 9 next season. But who knows? He could very well prove me wrong. Montreal could be first in the Canadian division and then go on a run and win the cup. And I will be the first one to admit I was wrong about Carey Price. But as it stands right now in the past few seasons, he's looked like an average goalie. He's looked like an average goalie some nights, and he's looked like a phenomenal goalie some nights. In the play-ins really boosted him up to number 9. I really think that I would have had him down at possibly 13 or 14 if it wasn't for those play-ins. But moving on, down to number 8 is a goalie on a team that at the beginning of the season, they looked like a guaranteed playoff team. And then they traded for a player that was supposed to make them better. It's Darcy Kuemper of the Arizona Coyotes. It was not Kemper's fault, the downfall of Arizona. And that defense in Arizona, I'm still a huge fan of Ekman-Larsson, but there's no denying that he had a very bad year last year. And other than that, their defense isn't great. And Arizona overall hasn't been a great team, and they probably are still going through a rebuild after this season. And even with these changed divisions, are probably still missing the playoffs this season. I could see them making it, but it's only because of the changed divisions. They'll probably be better than the 3 than the 3 California teams, but then they have a fight after that, and I don't see them winning it. It's not because of Darcy Kuemper, though. Darcy Kuemper's stats are amazing, and if he didn't get hurt this past season, he's the Vezina winner, in my opinion. I know what season Connor Hellebuck had, but Darcy Kuemper was just as good as him until he got hurt. And obviously he didn't look as good after his injury, but he was also hurt. And obviously I think Hellebuck is better than him. Because I do think that his team had a worse defense, but Darcy Kuemper's just a phenomenal goalie, and he doesn't get enough credit because he's on Arizona. Nobody talks about Darcy Kuemper anymore, and they'll probably protect him. Well, they'll definitely protect him in the Seattle expansion, and just if Seattle somehow, some way got their hands on Kuemper, they'd be in for a really good goalie. But Darcy Kuemper at number 8, And if you want to justify him being as high as 5, maybe even 4, I don't think I could argue with you. I could even see 3, but that's stretching it based on only 2 seasons of him being that good. But just in those 2 seasons, he has been one of the best goalies in the NHL, and it's undeniable. He's been amazing. At number 7, he probably would have been higher before the play-ins, before the playoffs. Ben Bishop. Ben Bishop has been phenomenal for Dallas. He was a Vezina finalist 2 seasons ago. Another phenomenal season this past year. The team couldn't score. Him and the defense kept them in it. Why is he only at 7 then? Because of Anton Khudobin. Khudobin having a phenomenal season with Dallas again. I mean, not with Dallas in the playoffs while he was hurt and helping them go to the Stanley Cup Finals. Prove that it might not be the goaltending that's keeping them in this. I think that Ben Bishop is a phenomenal goalie, but if Khudobin, who's never shown any signs of being as good as he was in the playoffs, can go on a run like that with that defense in Dallas, is it really Bishop? Now, I've been throwing a lot of shade at Bishop right now, but he's been phenomenal too. I would probably have had him at number 4 before Khudobin took over. But there's no denying that Bishop is still one of the best goalies in the NHL. When he was in Tampa, I wasn't that impressed with him, but I watched a little bit more of him when he went to Dallas, and he impresses me. And if Dallas goes on a playoff run this year again, I wouldn't be surprised if it's Bishop having like a .950 save percentage or something. And that's the reason why they made it as far as they did. And Bishop's just that good. On any night, Bishop can steal you a game. And he's an elite level goaltender. At number 6, goalie that I honestly struggle having this low, but the defenses are too good to have him higher, is Robin Lehner. So, in Buffalo, he got underrated. He had very good seasons until the season before he went to the Islanders. And he got underrated because that one season before he went to the Islanders was pretty terrible. And then he goes to the Islanders and has a Vezina finalist season. And he's an amazing goalie. But then there's that debate of the Islanders' defensive system. And I was one of the people making that debate, and I really thought that it might not be him, and that it might be the defense, but I was still optimistic about him. I thought that he would be an average goalie, probably around number 12 goalie in the NHL. But he went flying. He went to Chicago, whose defense was terrible. And he was amazing for them. And then he moves on to Vegas and takes the starting job away from Marc-Andre Fleury. I mean, you really can't argue with that. He is one of the best goalies in the NHL, and honestly, if you had him at number 3, I would not be able to make an argument to say that you're wrong, because he's just been that good. And if he didn't have that stint in Chicago, I probably would be able to make the argument about defense, but that stint in Chicago really proved it's not the defenses, it is Robin Lehner. Robin Lehner is an elite goalie in the NHL, and he's one of the best in the NHL. And next season, I will not be surprised if I'm telling you that he took number 2 or number 1 on the list next year. It'll be really tough for him to get that high. And it would probably require number 1 and 2 to have bad years, but more realistically, I could see him being number 3 on the list next year. But that's still phenomenal for a goalie that 3 seasons ago we were saying might not even have a job in the NHL in a few years. And he's really a great inspiration with his stories about his depression and being able to come back and be such a strong force in the NHL. And if Buffalo didn't let go of him and let him go to the Islanders, we might be talking about Buffalo making the playoffs for a few years in a row. But what's done is done, and he's a Vegas goalie now. And now that he has Pietrangelo on his team, look out. He's one of the reasons I think that Vegas could really win the cup next year. And now number 5 on my list. I went back and forth on this one a bit. But in the end, I settled on Tuukka Rask. Rask has been phenomenal his entire career. And I don't know if he's ever had a down year. His years were progressively getting worse. And then a few years ago, he was back to being one of the best goalies in the NHL again. He hasn't looked back. And I do think that a little bit of it is on the defense. Like I said about McAvoy, though, this is a year to prove that it's not the defense. Krug is gone, who granted didn't really do many favors for Rask, but Chara is looking like that he's probably gone. And without Zdeno Chara, who Rask has had for a long time helping him, that defense isn't as good. And it's honestly not a good defense at all, I would say. And it's time for Rask to prove I am still an elite level goalie. And I truly think that he is. But I truly also think that this is last season. After he finishes out his contract, I think that he'll hang up the skates. Especially if Boston wins the cup this year. I can't see it. I can't see him continuing. But he's still one of the best goalies in the NHL. And if he wanted to continue, he would still be one of the top goalies in the NHL. Yet again, you can argue up to 3. And the only reason I'm saying up to 3 for most of these is I feel like 1 and 2 are kind of unmovable. Maybe you can probably change them with each other, but I can't see either one of them not being a top 2 goalie. Number 4 on the list, I am writing his name short because I cannot spell his full name. It is Andrei Vasilevskiy. So Vasilevskiy, I was always a believer of Vasilevskiy is a product of the amazing defense in Tampa. They have McDonough, they have Hedman, they have Sergachev, they have Cernak. Last year they had Shattenkirk, who granted offensive defenseman, but still a very good defenseman. And like I said about Colorado, the puck's never in the defensive end, so how's he going to struggle? And then the playoffs happened. And the playoffs really proved to me that he is a phenomenal goalie. He was the only goalie for any team that played in every single game in the playoffs. And, that went that far. And he, going all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals with back-to-backs on your schedule and still staying one of the best goalies in those playoffs and not dragging, but helping your team win the Stanley Cup, it really proved to me it's not just the defense. Because even with that defense, you will get worn down, especially after he played that game where it was almost 3 games, the 8-period game that I talked about with Korpisalo. So on top of him playing the most games, he played an extra game and a half on top of that. And it was just a phenomenal season for Vasilevskiy again, and you can't argue any lower. And now continuing on to number 3. This is a controversial pick. Definitely. But I really think that he deserves it after the season he had last year, and I've been a huge fan of him for a few seasons in a row. And it's Jacob Markstrom of the Vancouver Canucks. I can't say enough good things about Markstrom. And like I said in my defenseman video, I don't think Quinn Hughes is that great defensively. He's average at best, I would say, defensively. And then their number 2 defenseman is probably Edler. And then Tyler Myers really didn't do much for them in the playoffs. It was basically Markstrom carrying that team for a while. And don't get me wrong, it's a very good team. And Demko did very well too, so you can make the argument about, hey, maybe it's the team because Demko had a very good season too. I don't think so. I truly think that Markstrom is one of the best goalies in the NHL. And I think that Calgary will win the Canadian division because of Jacob Markstrom. And him playing with a really good defense next year, as long as Giordano doesn't succumb to age too much, he can possibly win the Vezina next year, I would say. And I would not be surprised whatsoever. And now finally getting into the top 2, my immovable top 2 goalies. This goalie just won the Vezina Trophy. It's Connor Hellebuyck. Connor Hellebuyck, as second best goalie in the NHL, is, if you told me that 4 seasons ago, or 3 seasons ago even, I would say you're crazy, and I'd ask you, who the hell's Connor Hellebuyck? But he's really proved in these past 3 seasons that he is one of the best goalies in the NHL. And 3 seasons ago, he had a phenomenal year and was looking like an elite goalie. And then last year he struggled. But then this year that just passed, the 2020 season, the defense was terrible. With your top defensemen being Morrissey and Pionk, probably. As a Ranger fan, watch Pionk play almost every night. He will not do you any favors in the defensive end, and that is why we got rid of him. And that's why I also still don't regret that Trouba trade. I regret the Trouba contract, but the trade itself, getting rid of that black hole on defense, I really like. But granted, I really like Pionk still. But that defense was terrible. And they didn't really have any good two-way forwards that could really help with that. Probably Scheifele and Wheeler would be your best two-way forwards. But even then, they're not amazing, and definitely don't make up for the lack of power on the blue line. And his stats were, you could make an argument that Hellebuyck should have won the Hart Trophy, nevertheless the Vezina. And if you want to tell me that he's the best goalie in the NHL, I do not have an argument for you to say that number 1 is better. But he's just been amazing these past few seasons, and I can't see an argument for anybody below him being higher than him. And now finally, the number 1 goalie that I think has been criminally underrated these past few seasons, of the Anaheim Ducks, number 36, John Gibson. So Gibson had a down year this year. I will not deny that, even though he's number 1 on my list. But outside of this season, he has single-handedly been carrying Anaheim. And this season, the team was terrible from top to bottom, with arguably their best player, other than Gibson, being a washed-up Ryan Getzlaf. And he single-handedly is the reason why that team didn't bottom out in the standings. And when Anaheim gets through this rebuild, there's no question in my mind that Gibson will be the goalie that, if they do this rebuild right, will win them a Stanley Cup. And he will win a Vezina trophy. I do not have a doubt in my mind that John Gibson will win the Vezina in his career. He just needs a better team around him to finally win it. And he has been so consistent over the past few seasons other than last year. And last year was a fluke. And it was because his team was so terrible around him. And just every year before last year, he was one of the best goalies in the NHL. And then the past few seasons, as his team got worse, people were talking about him being not being a bad goalie, but not being at the same level as Vasilevsky and Rask and all those elite goalies. But there's no question in my mind about how amazing John Gibson is. He is single-handedly carrying Anaheim every game. And they are arguably almost as bad as Detroit or Ottawa without Gibson. And there's no question in my mind that he is the best goalie in the NHL. Granted, he has a season like he did last year, and Hellebuck has another season like last year. I probably give Hellebuck the boost over him, but I can't see an argument, even if he has the same type of season as he had last year, of anyone else on this list jumping above him. He has just been phenomenal and has been phenomenally consistent. It's just been unbelievable. And watching him play, he makes some saves that are just mind-boggling of how he can make those. And he's been by far the best goalie in the NHL for the past couple seasons. Not even just the past 2-3. It's been a while that he's been the best goalie in the NHL, and he's still young. And I can't wait to see Anaheim do better and for people to finally realize that he is the best goalie in the NHL when they finally get a good team around him. So just a quick recap on the list. Peter Mrazek at 26, 25, either Sharks goalie, 24 Bobrovsky, 23 Murray, 22 Greiss, 21 Varlamov, 20 Koskinen, 19 Soros, 18 Grubauer, 17 Ullmark, 16 Talbot, 15 Korpisalo, 14 Hart, 13 Yari, 12 Anderson, 11 Blackwood, 10 Binnington, 9 Price, 8 Kemper, 7 Bishop, 6 Lehner, 5 Rask, 4 Vasilevsky, 3 Markstrom, 2 Hellebuck, and 1 Gibson. I'd love to hear your thoughts on my list, and like I said in the last video, tear my list apart or praise me for having an amazing list. Whichever one you do, I'll be fine, and I'd love to hear your opinions on it. So thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.